The first time they left her behind, she was 5 years old and small enough to fit inside a flour barrel. It wasn't that her parents had meant to forget her. They were tired, worn thin by winter and worry, and there were too many children and not enough bread. When the wagon wheel snapped in the frozen mud and her brothers scrambled to help, no one noticed she had wandered a few paces off the road to pick up a bright blue stone. By the time she ran back, clutching her treasure in mittened hands, the wagon was already rolling away. She ran until her chest burned, her short legs pumping desperately, but the wagon didn't stop. A trapper found her at dusk, huddled under a pine tree with snow caught in her lashes. He carried her to the nearest settlement and left her with the preacher's wife, who clucked her tongue and said, "Such a tiny thing, won't grow much, I reckon." They were right about that. By 16, she was scarcely taller than most girls at 12. Her bones were fine as bird wings, her hands small, her voice soft and easy to overlook. In a land where strength was prized and harsh winters swallowed the weak, people shook their heads at the sight of her. Too small, they'd say, won't last long out here. Her name was Eliza May Holt, but most just called her Lisa. It was easier, shorter, something that suited her size. She learned early that if the world meant to underestimate her, she could use it. She slipped into spaces others couldn't. She climbed where others hesitated. She listened when people forgot she was in the room. But none of those things kept you fed forever. When the preacher's wife died and the new minister brought in his sister to run the house, Lisa found herself unnecessary. "We can't afford to keep idle hands," the sister said, though Lisa's hands were never idle. "You eat as much as a full, grown woman." It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. So Lisa packed her few belongings into a sack, a spare dress, a comb with 2 missing teeth, the blue stone she'd kept all these years, and set out for the mountains where rumor said a new logging camp had sprung up. Camps meant men. Men meant work, cooking, mending, cleaning. She walked for 3 days. The road narrowed to a path, then to little more than a suggestion between the trees. The air grew colder, sharper. Snow clung stubbornly to shadowed patches of ground, though spring had come to the valleys. On the 4th day, she heard the shouting. Not angry shouting, urgent. Wood splitting, a deep thud, and then a voice that rolled through the trees like distant thunder. Timber. She froze as a tree crashed down somewhere ahead, shaking the earth beneath her boots. When the echoes faded, she stepped forward carefully, following the scent of fresh sap. That was when she saw him. He stood in a clearing surrounded by felled logs, taller than any man she had ever seen. His shoulders were broad as a barn door, his beard thick and dark, streaked with copper where the sun caught it. His sleeves were rolled to reveal forearms roped with muscle. An axe hung loose in one hand as though it weighed nothing. He turned at the snap of a twig beneath her foot. For a moment they simply stared at one another. She felt as if she were looking up at a mountain that had decided to grow eyes. He blinked first. "You lost." His voice was deep, but not unkind. "I'm looking for the logging camp," she said, hoping her voice didn't tremble. "They said it was near here." He studied her from head to toe, not in a way that made her feel small, but in a way that measured practicalities: coat too thin, boots worn, shoulders narrow. "Camp's 2 miles east," he said, "but they ain't hiring." Her stomach tightened. "You know that for certain." "I do." He drove the axe into a stump and wiped his hands on a cloth tucked at his belt. "They lost 3 men to a rockslide last month. Owner cut back operations, sending half the crew down valley come summer." Lisa swallowed. "I can cook." "They gotta cook." "I can mend." "They mend their own." She lifted her chin. "I can work." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, touched his eyes. "Doing what?" "Whatever needs doing." He huffed a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "You're about as tall as my woodpile. I'm stronger than I look. I don't doubt it." He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "But these mountains ain't kind to folks half my size, let alone yours." There it was. The old familiar verdict, too small. "I don't need kindness," she said. For a moment he didn't answer. Wind moved through the pines above them, carrying the scent of snow and resin. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Lisa. Name's Rowan." He gestured toward a rough structure at the edge of the clearing. A cabin, half finished, walls of stacked logs, and a roof not yet shingled. "I ain't part of the camp. I work my own claim. Cut timber, trap, haul what I can down valley. You live alone." He nodded once. She hesitated, then forced the words out before her courage failed. "I'll work for you, for food and a place to sleep." His brows drew together. "I don't need help. You don't need mending, or someone to tend a fire while you're out, or cook something that isn't burnt squirrel." His mouth twitched despite himself. "You spying on my dinners now?" She glanced at the charred spit near the fire pit and allowed herself a small smile. "I've seen worse, not much." He considered her in silence, weighing the inconvenience against something else she couldn't read. "You got family?" he asked. "No." "Anyone coming to look for you?" "No." The answer seemed to settle something in him. "I ain't taking charity cases," he said. "I'm not charity." Another long pause. "Cabin's near done," he said at last. "One room, no spare bed. I'll sleep by the hearth." He studied her thin shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly from cold she tried to hide. "Just till summer," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Then you head back down valley." Relief flooded her so swiftly her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you." He raised a hand. "Don't thank me yet. Work starts at dawn. I'll be up before you." He snorted softly, as though doubting that. But the next morning, when Rowan stepped out into the gray light before sunrise, he found smoke already curling from the chimney and the scent of something warm and savory drifting through the air. Inside, Lisa stood on a wooden crate to reach the iron skillet over the fire. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing wrists so slight he wondered how they held a pan steady. She had somehow fashioned biscuits from the last of his flour, and stretched a handful of dried meat into something resembling stew. "You'll use up stores quick cooking like that," he said. She didn't startle at his voice. "I measured. There's enough for a week if we're careful. We." The word landed oddly. He ate in silence, expecting to taste failure. Instead, the food was simple, but good, better than anything he'd managed in months. After breakfast, she followed him outside without being told. "I can stack," she said, eyeing the logs. "You'll throw your back. Then show me how not to." He demonstrated, slower than usual, aware of her watching. She mimicked his movements, awkward at first, then steadier. She couldn't lift the largest logs, but she rolled them into place with clever leverage, using branches as fulcrums. By midday, sweat dampened her hair at the temples. Her breathing grew labored, but she didn't complain. When she stumbled on uneven ground and a log slipped from her grasp, Rowan stepped forward instinctively, catching it before it crushed her foot. "Enough," he said gruffly. "I can keep going." "I said enough." She bristled at the tone, and for a heartbeat he saw the fierce spark beneath her small frame. "You think I'm going to break," she said quietly. "I think you ain't built for hauling timber all day." "I wasn't built for being left behind either." She shot back before she could stop herself. The words hung between them, fragile and raw. Rowan's expression shifted, something softer edging out irritation. "Who left you?" "Everyone," she said, and bent to pick up a smaller log before he could ask more. That night, as wind rattled the half-finished roof, Rowan lay awake listening to her breathing near the hearth. It was light, almost imperceptible. He had known loneliness so long it had become another piece of furniture in his life, solid, unmoving. Now the cabin felt different, smaller, perhaps warmer. Over the weeks that followed, they fell into a rhythm. Lisa learned the paths between traps, her smaller footprints weaving beside his larger ones. She set snares with nimble fingers. She patched his torn shirts so neatly the seams nearly vanished. She kept careful account of supplies, stretching them farther than he thought possible. Rowan, in turn, found himself watching for the uneven places in the trail where she might stumble. He cut shorter logs for her to carry without being asked. When late snow threatened, he rose in the dark to reinforce the roof before she could suggest it. One afternoon, a storm rolled in sudden and fierce. Wind tore through the clearing, and sleet stung their faces as they hurried to secure loose timber. A gust caught Lisa off guard, nearly knocking her from her feet. Rowan reached her in 2 strides, one massive hand closing around her waist to steady her. She froze at the contact, breath hitching. His hand spanned nearly the breadth of her ribs. "You all right?" he asked, voice close to her ear to be heard over the wind. "Yes," she whispered. He didn't let go immediately. The warmth of her seeped through layers of wool and leather, startling in its intensity. He set her down gently once she found her footing, but the imprint of her smallness lingered against his palm. That night, thunder rolled over the mountains. Rain hammered the roof, finding weak seams and dripping through. Lisa scrambled to place pots beneath leaks. Rowan cursed under his breath. "Should have finished shingles last week." "We'll fix it," she said. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the cabin in harsh white light. For a heartbeat, he saw her clearly, hair loose from its braid, cheeks flushed from exertion, eyes bright with determination rather than fear. Too small, the world had said. He wasn't so sure. By the time the storm passed, half the roof had given way. Dawn revealed damage worse than he'd feared. One wall sagged slightly, logs shifted. Rowan surveyed the ruin with tight jaw. "Gonna have to rebuild that side." Lisa followed his gaze. "Then we will." He looked down at her, rain, soaked and shivering but unbowed. "Cabin ain't fit for you," he said suddenly. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "It was built for one man who didn't mind sleeping under drafts and eating off a stump." He rubbed a hand through his beard. "You deserve better than this." She laughed softly. "Deserves got little to do with it." "It does now." The decision seemed to root itself in him all at once. He spent that day marking trees not for timber to sell, but for something else, something sturdier. "Larger, what are you doing?" she asked as he drove stakes into the ground beyond the clearing. "Building proper." "For who?" He met her eyes. "For you." The words stole the air from her lungs. "I don't need." "You need walls that don't leak and a roof that don't fall. You need a bed off the ground, windows that let in light." He hesitated. "And space that ain't borrowed." She stared at the outline he had traced in the earth. It was larger than the first cabin, not grand but solid, thoughtful. "You'd build all that for me, for us," he corrected quietly. Work began in earnest. Rowan felled the straightest trees he could find. Lisa stripped branches and smoothed rough edges. He shaped beams. She gathered moss and clay for chinking. They worked side by side, sunburned and sore, hands blistered and healing again. Some nights exhaustion stole their words. Other nights they spoke of things neither had dared voice before. He told her of the farm he'd grown up on far east of the mountains, of brothers who'd left for cities and never written back, of a father who believed a man's worth was measured in acres and sons. Rowan had been the largest of them all, but somehow never large enough. She told him of flour barrels and blue stones, of running after wagons that didn't stop, of rooms where she'd stood silent while decisions about her life were made over her head. "They always thought I wouldn't hear," she said, like being small meant I wasn't there. Rowan's jaw tightened. "I hear you, I know," she replied. As the cabin rose, so did something fragile between them. One evening, as they set the final beam in place, Lisa slipped on the ladder. Rowan caught her easily, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. She found herself pressed against his chest, heart racing. He smelled of pine and sweat and sun. "You can't keep catching me like that," she murmured, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "Why not?" "Because I might start jumping on purpose." The words hung there, daring and light. For a heartbeat, he searched her face for mockery. Finding none, he let out a low laugh that rumbled through him. "Reckon I'd catch you every time." He set her down slowly, hands lingering at her waist a fraction longer than necessary. The cabin took shape before summer fully bloomed. It had 2 small rooms, a proper hearth, and a window facing east to greet the morning sun. Rowan carved simple designs into the doorframe pine needles and mountain peaks. On the day they moved her few belongings inside, Lisa stood in the center of the main room, turning in a slow circle. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's sturdy," he corrected. "It's ours," she said. He swallowed hard. That night they sat on the small porch Rowan had added as an afterthought. Fireflies flickered in the clearing. The mountains stood dark and watchful around them. "You don't have to send me down valley," she said quietly. He had known the question would come. "I ain't sending you anywhere." Her fingers twisted in her skirt. "I mean, when summer ends." He looked at her then, really looked. At the strength in her small hands, the steadiness in her gaze. "I built this cabin because I don't want you leaving," he said simply. Her breath caught. "You sure?" She whispered. "I'm still small." He reached for her hand, enveloping it in his own. "You're the strongest thing I ever seen," he said. "Size don't measure that." Tears slipped down her cheeks, catching in the fading light. "No one's ever chosen me," she admitted. "I am." The words settled around them like a vow. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. She leaned into him, resting her head against his broad shoulder. In the months that followed, the mountains tested them as they tested all things. There were lean weeks and heavy snows, arguments over trivial matters and laughter that echoed through the trees. But the cabin stood firm, and so did they. Travelers passing through sometimes paused at the edge of the clearing, surprised to see the giant of a man splitting wood, while a small woman directed him where to stack it. "Don't look like she weighs more than a sack of grain," one man remarked once. Rowan glanced at Lisa, who stood with hands on hips, issuing instructions about roof repairs. "She weighs plenty," he said calmly, "enough to anchor me." At night, when the fire burned low and the wind whispered against sturdy walls, Lisa would sometimes hold the blue stone in her palm and think of the little girl chasing a wagon down a muddy road. She no longer felt left behind. In the heart of the mountains, in a cabin built by hands larger than life and love deeper than roots, she had found something no one could measure by inches. She had found a home, and the giant who built it had finally discovered that the smallest things can carry the greatest strength of all.